thank you for joining us. Whether you're listening in the background, just relaxing, or settling in for the night, I'm very glad you're here. Tonight we're going back to the 2010 to 2011 NBA season, and to a championship run that felt both surprising and overdue. Because this was not a story about a young team arriving early. It was not a story about a flashy new super team doing exactly what everyone expected. And it was not a story about the league's next era starting on schedule. In a lot of ways, that season was supposed to belong to somebody else. The NBA was shifting. Miami had just brought together LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, and the entire league seemed to tilt around that idea. The Heat felt like the future. The Lakers were still the two-time defending champions. Chicago had Derrick Rose rising into MVP form. Oklahoma City had Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden coming fast. A new era seemed to be taking shape from every direction. And then there were the Dallas Mavericks. Dallas was still very good, but it did not feel like the future. It felt older than the teams around it, more settled, more experienced, and maybe a little closer to the end than the beginning. Dirk Nowitzki was still one of the best players in the league, but by then his career had also picked up a certain weight. He had won an MVP. He had carried Dallas through years of strong regular seasons. He had already reached the finals once, but he still did not have a championship. And when players spend enough years that close, people start to wonder if the missing piece is ever going to come. So this story begins with a league that looked ready to move on to something new. And with a Dallas team that still had a lot of quality, but did not look like the obvious answer to anything. That is what makes the run feel so good to look back on now. Because the Mavericks did not just win a title, they stepped in front of the story the league thought it was about to tell, and for one spring, they changed it. Before the playoffs ever started, Dallas already had a lot to carry. The Mavericks had been one of the league's best regular season teams for years, but the deeper emotional reference point was still 2006. That was the year Dallas reached the NBA Finals, took a 2-0 lead over Miami, and then lost the series. That loss stayed with the franchise. It stayed with Dirk, and the seasons after that did not clear it away. There were strong teams, there were more 50-win seasons, there was respect. But there were also playoff disappointments, and over time that changes how a team is seen. It stops feeling like a team on the rise. It starts feeling like a team still chasing something that may already have slipped past it. That was part of the background in 2010 to 2011. Dallas was not trying to become relevant. Dallas had been relevant for years. The question was whether it could still become complete. The roster itself had an interesting shape. Dirk was the center of everything, as he had been for a long time. But around him was a veteran group that made sense in a very practical way. Jason Kidd brought order and experience. Jason Terry brought scoring and confidence. Tyson Chandler changed the defense and gave the team force at the rim. Sean Marion could still do a little bit of everything. J.J. Barea gave them speed and change of pace. Peja Stojakovic arrived later and helped stretch the floor. Deshaun Stevenson brought edge. It was not the youngest team, but it was a smart team. And a balanced one. Rick Carlisle had a group that could play slowly when it needed to, spread the floor when it wanted to, and defend with more toughness than Dallas teams had sometimes shown in earlier years. That mattered a great deal. The Mavericks were not built around one dramatic idea. They were built around fit. That is one reason the team holds up so well in memory. It did not feel assembled to make headlines. It felt assembled to solve problems. If one lineup needed more shooting, Dallas could find it. If a game needed more size and defense, Dallas had that too. If the offense needed calming down, Kidd could settle it. If it needed a burst of pace, Barea could change the rhythm. And always, in the middle of all of it, there was Dirk. The regular season did not make them look unstoppable, but it made them look real. Dallas finished 57-25 and took the third seed in the Western Conference. That is an excellent season, but even then, it did not make them the center of the league's attention. Miami had the spotlight, Chicago had Rose. The Lakers still had championship gravity. The Thunder looked like a rising power. Dallas felt more like a serious veteran team waiting to see if it still had one real run left in it. There was also adversity in the middle of the year. Caron Butler, who had been an important part of the team, went down with a season-ending injury in January. That could have been the kind of loss that quietly lowers a team's ceiling, and maybe for a while, that is how it looked. But it also forced Dallas to become a little clearer about what it was. The offense leaned even more fully into Dirk. The rotation tightened around the team's veteran strengths, and the Mavericks kept going. That matters in stories like this. Sometimes the championship team isn't the team that had the cleanest year. Sometimes it is the team that has already had to adjust before the real pressure begins. There was also a certain tone to the way Dallas carried itself that season. It was not dramatic, it was not loud. There was confidence, but not the kind that demanded attention. That may be another reason the championship run felt so satisfying once it happened. The Mavericks were not asking the league to believe in them as a movement or a dynasty. They were just trying to win 4 rounds. And because of that, the team often felt calmer than the teams around it. The playoffs opened with Portland. That series is easy to overlook because of what came after it, but it is an important part of the story. Dallas did not begin this championship run by looking untouchable. It began by doing the necessary work. The Mavericks took Game 1 at home and then won Game 2 as well, which gave the series a calm start. But Portland was not going away. LaMarcus Aldridge was a difficult matchup. The Blazers had enough scoring to keep games tense, and Dallas still had to prove that it could get through an opening round without old anxieties showing up. Game 3 in Portland turned into a close Trailblazers win. While there may have been some cause for concern after a loss, the feeling in Dallas still felt calm. Then came Game 4, and that became the first real jolt of the run. Dallas built a huge lead and looked ready to take a 3-1 series advantage. Then Brandon Roy led a stunning Portland comeback, and suddenly the whole series felt different. That is the kind of loss that can change a playoff story in a bad way. A team can carry a collapse like that into the next game. It can begin to tighten up. It can start hearing old doubts again. And Dallas had enough history behind it that those doubts would have been easy to imagine. Maybe this would be another strong team that failed before it could become memorable. Maybe this would be another spring where the Mavericks looked solid until the series asked for something harder. Dallas did not let the series become that. The Mavericks won Game 5 at home, then closed the series in Portland in Game 6. That may not have been the most glamorous round of the run, but it was useful. It showed that Dallas could take a punch without losing its shape. It showed that the team did not need the playoffs to feel easy in order to keep moving. That would matter later. Then came the Lakers, and that is where the whole story changed. Los Angeles was still the 2-time defending champion. Kobe Bryant was still Kobe Bryant. Paul Gasol was still there. Andrew Bynum was still there. Phil Jackson was still on the sideline. If the Mavericks were going to prove that they were more than a solid veteran team, this was the place to do it. And Dallas did much more than that. They took control of the series immediately. The Mavericks won Game 1 in Los Angeles. Then they won Game 2 there as well. Now the Mavericks had turned a series that many people expected to be difficult into a test of whether the Lakers still had enough edge left to respond. Back in Dallas, the Mavericks won Game 3 and took a 3-0 lead. At that point, people were still waiting for the Lakers to push back. They never really did. And one reason the series feels so important is that Dallas did not win it by surviving chaos. The Mavericks often looked clearer, more spaced, more settled. Tyson Chandler gave them defensive force and vertical pressure around the rim. Dirk remained the centerpiece. Terry kept finding scoring, and the floor kept opening for Dallas shooters. Game 4 became one of the most startling games of the entire postseason. Dallas hit shot after shot from the outside. The Mavericks made 23-pointers that day. Peja Stojakovic alone made 6 of them. The Lakers came apart. The score turned lopsided, the emotion turned ugly, and by the end of it, the 2-time champions had been swept out of the playoffs. That sweep was the moment Dallas stopped being a good story and became a genuine threat. It is one thing to beat a good team in 6 or 7 games. It is another to sweep the reigning champion and make the whole series feel decisive. That series made everybody look at the Mavericks differently. Now they were not just experienced. Now they looked dangerous. More than that, they looked like a team whose strengths had become very hard to argue with. They could score efficiently. They could defend better than expected. They had a star who could still own a game, and they had enough veteran certainty to keep big moments from becoming frantic. The Western Conference Finals brought Oklahoma City, and once again the contrast in styles made the story stronger. The Thunder felt young, fast, explosive, and still on the way up. Durant was becoming one of the faces of the league. Westbrook played with relentless force. Harden was there too, still early in his rise. This looked more like the future. Dallas looked like the team trying to hold off that future for one more round. Game 1 gave the series one of its defining performances. Dirk scored 48 points. He went 24 for 24 from the foul line. It was one of those great playoff performances that feels simple when you say it, and strange when you really stop to think about it. 48 points in a conference finals opener is already huge. Doing it while never missing a free throw makes it feel even cleaner. Dirk was not frantic. He was not forcing the game. He just kept scoring, and Oklahoma City never really found a way to stop him. Dallas won the opener, then lost Game 2. So again, the run asked them to respond rather than coast. And again, they did. The Mavericks won Game 3 in overtime. That was a useful kind of win, not a beautiful one, not a relaxed one. Just the kind that lets a team show it can live inside tension for a while and still find the right play late. Then came Game 4, when Dallas trailed by 15 in the fourth quarter and still came back to win. That is another one of those moments that tells you what kind of team you are watching. A team that can come back like that in a conference finals game is not just talented. It is calm. It trusts itself. It does not treat the score as a final verdict too early. And that comeback also gave the series a different shape. Instead of a long fight, it suddenly felt like Dallas had too much control of the emotional balance. The Thunder were dangerous enough to make the Mavericks work, but Dallas kept making the more mature decisions. It kept getting the game back onto terms it liked. The Mavericks closed the series in Game 5. Now they were going back to the NBA Finals for the first time since 2006. Waiting for them was Miami. That is what gives the whole season its sharpest emotional shape, because now all the larger storylines met in one place. Dallas had the older star still chasing the missing title. Miami had the new super team everyone expected to rule the league. Dallas had the memory of 2006. Miami was trying to turn a year of noise and expectation into the beginning of a championship era. Dallas looked steady. Miami looked inevitable. And if you were writing the clean version of the NBA's next chapter before the finals began, you probably were not writing it for the Mavericks. That is what made the series so compelling. It was not simply veterans against stars. It was also a contest between two different ideas of where the league was headed. Miami looked like the future arriving in a rush. Dallas looked like experience making one last careful argument. Game 1 went to Miami. The Heat won 92-84. That result did not seem shocking. It fit the larger expectation. Maybe Dallas had come this far, but now the bigger talent would settle the series. Dirk also dealt with a torn tendon in the middle finger of his left hand during the finals, and that gave the whole series a slightly more fragile feel from Dallas's side. Nothing about the matchup looked easy. Then came Game 2, and that is one of the true hinge moments of the whole playoff run. Miami led by 15 points with a little more than 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The series looked like it was slipping toward 2-0. At that point, a lot of teams would have started thinking about Game 3. Dallas did not. The Mavericks kept scoring. They kept defending. The lead kept shrinking. Jason Terry hit a huge three. The game tightened possession by possession. And then Dirk drove left, finished a layup through his injured hand, and Dallas had stolen the game. The Mavericks closed on a 22-5 run and won 95-93. That comeback changed everything. It did not win the title, but it changed the feeling of the finals. Now Miami did not look quite so inevitable. Now Dallas did not look like a respectable underdog. Now it looked like a team that truly believed it could finish this. Back in Dallas, the series stayed tense. Miami won Game 3, so once again the Mavericks were being asked to answer rather than protect comfort. Game 4 became one of the most important games of the entire championship run. If Miami won, the Heat would lead the series 3-1. If Dallas won, the finals would be tied again. And Dirk, sick with a fever, still scored 21 points. Late in the game, he drove for another left-handed layup, and once again it felt as if the whole season kept narrowing to one player making one more needed play. Dallas won 86-83. The series was tied at 2-2. That one mattered because the Mavericks did not let the finals start leaning away from them again, and the winning formula was becoming clearer. Dirk remained the center. But Dallas kept getting help from all over. Jason Terry scored, Tyson Chandler did the hard work inside, Sean Marion defended. Kidd managed the game, and Barea gave Miami problems with his speed. Barea, in particular, gave the finals a useful change in rhythm. He was small, quick, fearless, and hard for Miami to fully contain. When he got into the lane, the whole game could shift slightly. That is another big reason this title run holds up so well as a story. Dirk was the star, clearly. But the team never felt like one man dragging everybody else uphill. It felt like a veteran group that understood exactly how to support him. Game 5 was one of the biggest nights of the series. With the finals tied at 2-2, Dallas won in Miami and took a 3-2 lead. Now the title was one win away, and the Mavericks had put themselves in a position that still felt slightly unreal when compared with the story the season had started with. The Heat were supposed to be at the beginning of something grand. The Mavericks were now one game from denying them a title in year 1. Game 5 also captured something else that was true of the whole run. Dallas was no longer surprising anybody by that point. It was simply executing better in the biggest moments. The passes were sharp, the spacing made sense, the role players looked ready, and the emotional tone of the series was drifting Dallas's way. Miami still had the bigger names in the public imagination, but the Mavericks looked like the more settled team. Game 6 is remembered rightly as Dirk's release. Dallas did not play a perfect game. Miami pushed. The moment was heavy, but the Mavericks stayed in control of themselves. They led by 12 after the first quarter. Miami made runs. Dallas answered. Jason Terry scored 27 points. Barea kept giving Miami trouble. Dirk did not shoot especially well early, but he stayed with it. And as the game moved into the fourth quarter, the title that had sat just out of reach for Dirk and for the franchise started to feel real. That is part of what makes the ending feel so good. Dallas did not need a miracle in the final minutes. It needed steadiness. And steadiness is exactly what that team had become best at. The final score was 105-95. The Mavericks had won the series in 6 games. Dirk had his championship, Dallas had its first NBA title, and one of the most anticipated stories in the sport had been interrupted right at the beginning. It is hard to overstate how satisfying that felt in the moment. Not simply because people enjoy an upset, but because the Mavericks had earned this path in such a complete way. They beat Portland after a real scare. They swept the defending champion Lakers. They beat the Young Thunder before that group fully arrived. And then they beat Miami with all the attention and expectation that came with it. It is hard to draw a cleaner path than that, and yet the emotional center of the story is still Dirk. Because great team stories often settle around one face. Dirk had been one of the most distinctive stars in basketball for years. His game was unusual. His shooting touch was unique for a player his size. His loyalty to Dallas had become part of his identity. But until 2011, there was still an empty space beside all of that. The championship was missing. That is what the Mavericks finally gave him. Not just a trophy, but a kind of peace in the way his career would be remembered. The loss in 2006 would always be there. The earlier playoff disappointments would always be part of the record. But now there was something larger than those. Now there was the title run. There was also something nice about the way Dallas won it. This was not a team built around noise. It was not a team built around youth. It was not a team built around the idea of being the future. It was built around timing, fit, experience, and belief. It looked like a team that understood exactly how much chance it had left and decided to use all of it. Maybe that is why the 2011 Mavericks still feel so warm in memory. They were not just champions, they were payoff champions. The kind of team that makes years of waiting feel worth it. The kind of team that reminds people that the obvious story is not always the one that happens. And the kind of team that, for one postseason, made age and patience look stronger than glamour and inevitability. There is also something very appealing about where the championship sits in the larger NBA story. Miami would still have more finals ahead. LeBron would still win titles. Oklahoma City's young stars would keep rising. The league really was changing. But for that 1 year, Dallas held the line. It took all of that momentum gathering around the next era and made it wait. That is a big part of why this title still stands out. It feels both like a final reward for an older core and like a small interruption in history. A pause before the next chapter. And because it came through such a difficult playoff path, the pause feels earned rather than accidental. Thank you for spending some time with me. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the 2011 Dallas Mavericks and at the long road to the championship that finally completed them. It's a story about timing, resilience, and a veteran team finding the exact right spring to put everything together. And maybe that is the nicest way to remember it. A team that had been close before, a star who had carried the weight for years, a league already looking ahead to something new, and one last great run that stepped in, slowed everything down, and claimed the title first. Thanks so much for joining on Chill Sports History. We love sharing these fun stories with you every week. If you'd like to come back for another story, we'd be very happy to have you here, and we can't wait to share more with you.